Well, a stunning development coming from Capitol Hill. So we are just over 40 days away from arguably the most important election in American history. And now Congress is pushing forward a proposed 28th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. A new amendment right now, 40 days before the election. You can't make this up. It used to be that the deep state forces sort of operated in the shadows. We didn't know what they were doing. And now they're operating sort of right out in the public. Force feeding information right to our members of Congress and force feeding it to the mockingbird media. Congress is openly telling us right now that they are prepping for a mass casualty event in Washington, D.C. Yes, mass assassinations of our members of Congress. I'm talking over 100 members of Congress killed in a single event. They're preparing for it, according to the Washington Post, and now confirmed by Politico. A bipartisan group of congressmen are suddenly concerned about the nation's preparedness for a catastrophic event. They're rolling out a plan for the 28th Amendment called the Continuity Amendment. Continuity of Government Amendment. So get this. They would allow members of Congress to be rapidly replaced in the event that 100 or more of them are suddenly killed. Because when you see these headlines from like the Washington Post and you read these stories from Politico, I want all of you to like go a layer deeper. Like, what's the real goal here? First of all, it's to scare you, number one, right? That's what they're hoping to do, to scare you. Who knows if there's some sort of a false flag? Who the hell knows? Anyway, their main goal is to scare you. And then you want to go a layer deeper and find out exactly what they're trying to do here. So if 100 members of Congress are suddenly killed, no election would be needed, according to this new continuity of government plan. No election. Instead, no voters involved in a mass change of our government. Not at all. No voters allowed. Sound familiar? Like, I don't know, the Obama coup that just removed President Biden from the ticket from running for office again without any voting by Democratic voters, placed Kamala Harris as the presumptive nominee.
Yes.
Sound familiar?
That happened in the year 2024.
We had a coup in the United States a few weeks ago. A Democratic coup in the United States a few weeks ago. And they removed a sitting president from the ticket, replaced him with their new puppet. And they did it all without you voting anything. It's amazing, actually. Sounds like something you'd hear about in North Korea, and we'd be mocking it. But no, it happened right here. Right now, the current rules necessitate special elections to fill vacant seats. Isn't it funny we think that the Donbass region, they voted to join Russia. They voted over 80%, and they said, and the United States says that's a sham election. The people didn't really want it. We don't, unless we see that everyone votes, then we don't respect it. That's what the Democrats say. Kamala Harris gets 0 votes. Legit. Right. Totally cool. Someone in our chat just said, let me scroll back up here. Says someone, sounds like, Autumn Hill says they sound like they're pulling a Ukraine. Yeah, that's kind of what it sounds like. They're pulling a Ukraine. So get this. This would allow members of Congress to be rapidly replaced in the event that 100 or more of them are suddenly killed. No election needed, no voters involved at all. Right now, the current rules necessitate special elections to fill vacant seats, right? A member of Congress dies in a plane crash. Special election. A member of Congress dies in a car crash. Special election. America has had hundreds of special elections since the late 1700s. And they're actually fascinating. If you want to actually dive deep into all of the special elections, they're really interesting. Some people just choose not to serve. Like they're elected and they're like, nah, I'm not going to serve. Oh, okay, now we need to have a special election. Others died in car crashes, mysterious circumstances. So we've had hundreds of these over the years. Back since the 1700s, we've dealt with it. But now, suddenly, 40 days before an election, Congress is really focused on this. Red flags everywhere. So America's had hundreds of those. But what has changed right now? Like what has changed right now, 40 days before an election? Let's put a pin in that for a second. Could it have anything to do with a 2016 study of special elections that the House of Representatives decided to do? So the House of Representatives put out their own study to see how, this was during Obama's time in office in 2016, to see how special elections were carried out. It found that during special elections, the number one factor that determined if a candidate would win in a sudden special election was the approval of the president. So if Trump is hugely popular, then a special candidate would likely win that special election. If the president is hated, then they're likely to lose. So the number one factor for the success of a candidate in these special elections is the popularity of the president of the United States at the time. Pretty interesting, because I guess there's not a lot of other time right now with a special election, so the popularity of the president really drives the narrative here. In other words, if you have a Democrat running and Kamala is president and the country thinks she's a disaster, well, then the candidate likely loses that special election, because according to this study by the House of Representatives, right now we have a 49-day time limit to hold special elections, but Congress thinks that's too long. And they would get rid of that election, and instead, here's how the amendment would work. Lawmakers would submit a list of 5 successors from their own party to the state governor. In the event of a mass casualty incident, hundreds of members of Congress are killed, wiped out. The governor then would appoint one of these nominees as the replacement, ensuring that the legislative body remains operational until they could get their act together and then hold an election. But right away, the governor would choose based on those selections from their party. Okay, no voters needed. You don't need a vote. You don't need voters in this. But here's where it gets tricky. Passing a constitutional amendment, of course, is nearly impossible in the United States. We don't have very many of them, and for good reason. It requires a 2/3 majority to vote in both the House and the Senate, followed by a ratification from 3/4 of the state legislatures in the country. But the bigger question is, why now? Do they know something we don't? Are we facing a mass casualty event that we need to be made aware of? Do you have some information you'd like to share with us on this? Could it have anything to do with the wide open southern borders and the amount of military-aged men that have now come into the United States armed? I'd like to know about this. Are the warmongers in the deep state planning to take us to war with Iran, with Russia? Is that what the Biden administration is trying to do? And the Pentagon? Certainly looks that way. Certainly looks that way. A nuclear strike on D.C. while Congress is in session? Or imagine a State of the Union address when everyone is in the same room, for crying out loud. What are they exactly hiding here? I would love to know. There are no such things as coincidences in Washington, D.C. Why now, with 40 days before an election, are they pushing forth on a 28th Amendment to the Constitution for a continuity of government? You think it's a coincidence? Why is Congress right now doing this? So just so you understand, over the past 15 years, we've seen a number of close calls. AOC, terrified for her life. She was the January 6th. Remember AOC? She almost thought she was going to get killed. She was not even in the building. She was in a totally other building, but she was terrified. In a building down the street. We've seen shootings. We've seen train crashes, right? We've seen all sorts of different things. We've seen 2017, a gunman opened fire at a GOP baseball practice, nearly killing House Minority Whip Steve Scalise. Lawmakers are concerned that illegal guns are coming across the southern border in the hands of gang members that could lead to a mass casualty event. But all of this is moot, right? Because right now, our continuity of government protocols in the event of a national emergency take the power away from Congress, and the president has to put it into this guy's hands. This guy right here is, let me see if I can get my images up here. Next image. I can't find the next image.
Sorry, I can't help you. I'm sitting over here.
I'm trying. All right. No, that's the wrong one. Next image. Oh, well, we'll get the images up later. But anyway, this is Gregory Gallo, a name you guys should all learn. Here he is. He is the commander of NORAD and NORTHCOM, which means that in a continuity of government scenario where national security is at risk, he becomes our leader. The head of NORAD becomes our leader. He basically becomes the acting head of government. He calls the shots. Not Tim Walz, not J.D. Vance. The head of NORAD becomes our leader in the case of a catastrophic event and an invasion of our country. NORAD even boasts about it on their own Twitter feed, talking about how, that's what NORAD does, enables continuity of government operations. And he's in Washington right now having meetings about continuity of government. Okay, it's all interesting timing, isn't it? That's the law. So if Biden dies or resigns, then Kamala Harris becomes president, but not if there's an invasion of the United States. Under the law, General George Gallo becomes our leader. So the timing of this 28th Amendment proposal on the cusp of a major election right now raises some serious eyebrows. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments below, what you guys think about this. Let us know.
Yes, that is extremely troubling, I would say.
I'm struck by the timing of it. I mean, what do you guys think in the comments here? Is it the Washington Post breaks this story? By the way, the Washington Post is a mouthpiece of the CIA and the FBI. We've had whistleblowers from both of those organizations on our show telling us that when they want to leak stories to America, where do they go? They go to the New York Times and the Washington Post to leak these stories.
Yes.
That's what they do. So the Washington Post, of course, is an extension of the CIA and the FBI and the deep state. So is the New York Times. So it's interesting that we're getting this information from the Washington Post first. And then, of course, Politico confirming it. It's deeply, deeply troubling.
Yes. What they seem to be hoping is that there's no October surprise and we just get through it. And maybe that's one sentiment I share is that my nerves are shot. I don't want any more surprises. I just want to take this to the polls already.
Well, also look at this picture here. I mean, and in our next coming up here, we're going to talk about this, like this fake alien invasion. Like they're pushing for this very, very soon. And you're starting to see we've been covering it here on the show. This idea that we're going to see a World War III moment, and then suddenly missiles are going to be shot out of the sky. People sharing videos over Israel last week of these missiles being shot out of the sky by mysterious craft. And so what better way to unite us all than with a fake alien invasion that is run by the military-industrial complex? It brings us all together. We give over all of our civil rights. We give over all of our civil liberties like we did after the 9/11, like under the Patriot Act. So there's a number of sources that we've been speaking to. These are whistleblowers who are talking about this, that be aware of an October surprise of a fake alien invasion.
Right.
To scare us all and unite us all. And then guess what? We can be locked down once again, and we can turn over. And by the way, it's all about continuity of government.
October surprises were not true. Like those things were not a manipulation of reality or any kind of distortion. It was George Bush did get a DUI. Hillary Clinton was investigated by James Comey.
Yeah.
Trump did have COVID. These are the real October surprises. So now they're sort of showing you, like, if you see anything that's an October surprise, it's probably fake news. It's probably right-wing nut job conspiracy stuff. Like, it's not real. So don't put any stock in it.
The Y files, the Project Bluebeam. I mean, it's kind of like laying that out. Like, this is exactly what was talked about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the idea of a fake alien invasion is all about continuity of government, as our upcoming guest is going to talk about here. Because when you then take away, when you have this like invasion that we need to all now be locked down because of, and they control it, there's a continuity of government that takes the president of the United States out of the equation, and it puts it in the hands of NORAD. And NORAD then becomes the controller of the United States. It becomes the de facto president of the United States. So then we are then under sort of a martial law, and we lose and sort of give up all of our civil liberties. And that's exactly what they would love to do. That's exactly what we did after 9/11 with the Patriot Act. So it's not ridiculous at all. I love that photo, though. I mean, I love that they chose a UFO for that. I mean, they're literally preparing us for this.
I didn't see it that way, but I see what you're saying.
I mean, just listen to these whistleblowers who are talking about this and warning about it.
What is the October surprise, if not UFO fake threat?
I think it's a very good candidate. I think that the UFO threat in combination with COG, triggering COG, is why we're seeing this UFO threat thing floated again, and why you see Elizondo rolled out, etc. So you're right in the heart of that. I don't know if they think that they can pull that off. But something is going on deep in that system. The October surprise could be the elevation of Harris to the presidency, and so they would try to, use the powers of the presidency there. Or it may constitute either a cyber attack or a Russian nuclear exchange. These things are all on the table. For me, the UFO threat is very appealing to them. I'll tell you why. They've worked on it for a long time. And it's something which, is part of their plans. So for me, once they had the Northcom commander talking about shooting down UFOs in 2023, that doomsday clock around the subject that I was talking about moved closer to midnight as far as the activation of COG. So we'll see. But certainly The aerospace aspect, it's too ignored. Aerospace is at the heart of the destruction of the political system. You have to understand the aerospace piece if you want to get to the real core. I've looked at the electoral map very closely, and it's very difficult for the Democrats to beat Trump in a fair election because they've had a terrible economy. They have a terrible record. They've let the border collapse. They're starting all these wars overseas. They don't have a good candidate. And they've had Stepford Biden up there bumbling for 3 years, being run by people with lanyards in the back. So, in general, the push is to throw the bum out. That's where the weight of things is. Trump is coming in, and once he got Kennedy's support, remember, Kennedy got as high as 15% of the vote himself. It's a tremendous lift. So, in my opinion, under normal circumstances, Trump would win. And then the most dangerous period would be between the inauguration and being the incoming president-elect. And you've got a couple of months there. So I think it would constitute a strange situation. And I think they've tried to lay down narratives where they can still keep power, you know. So that's where I think a COG piece is. And the whole thing about civil war, I do believe that they want a chaotic environment so they can call in a COG emergency response.
They have to. I mean,
Yeah.
I just keep going because they've committed such incredible treason and genocide that, I mean, they cannot be held accountable. They cannot afford that. I mean, they're going to throw every option at it so that they will never have to be accountable for their crimes.
Well, it's true. I think also that they don't want to deal with 4 years of Trump. They need some way around it. And we've seen from the assassination attempts, that's been their solution. It hasn't worked. Putting him in jail hasn't worked. Trying the endless media barrage against him hasn't worked. So if they're committed to that, they're running out of options. They're trying to put the continuity of government into the Constitution as an amendment. Now, let me tell you something. Continuity of government got ratified through the National Defense and National Security Act because they needed a structure to survive a nuclear engagement. That's where it comes from. It doesn't have any constitutional bearing the way that it operates now. For example, zero oversight and all this kind of stuff, and flouting, you know, the rule of law and all the rest of it, and operating in this completely clandestine fashion. Now, the people who are, let's say, around that and pushing for the idea of a COG rule want it to be part of the Constitution before they enact it because they're worried about that. That's probably part of the data that they've been getting when they've looked over this possibility. Now, I don't think that the whole structure is in favor of pushing that COG button, but that element inside of it that has been moving in very unusual ways, shall we say. One of the things that they did is they try to introduce this Continuity Act as the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. This only happened 2 weeks ago. And it's very interesting because the characters involved have direct links to the UFO file. I'm going to get into those now.
I want to hear that.
Yeah, this is very interesting. Let's start with this. Derek Kilmer, the Democrat congressman from Washington State, introduces constitutional amendment to ensure congressional continuity, reduce incentive for political violence. It has nothing to do with political violence. Part of the, I can read the whole thing. I printed it out here tonight. It's very quick. It's only 2 pages. But part of the constitutional amendment, what's in there, is the idea that the congressman can say, I want this person to succeed me. Nobody who's elected. Now, we do see unusual things, you know, if a senator dies in a plane crash, sometimes his wife takes over the seat temporarily. There's an election and all the rest. But this is saying, well, I'll tell you what, you just choose somebody. So if you're out, we just have whoever you left in place. This is also part of the continuity of government moves to set up Congress now. Now they're thwarting the will of the voters. But the person that he sponsored the bill with was very interesting. His name was Representative Wenstrup, who is from Ohio. And why was he on the radar recently? Well, Wenstrup warns all about that UFO threat. He's big out there. UFO sightings are national security concern. We need to pursue this. That's Wenstrup. He's the partner of our friend Derek Kilmer, who sponsored the constitutional amendment to ensure congressional continuity. That's the constitutional amendment number 28. And his partner in it was Wenstrup, who has been pushing this UFO threat over the past 2 years. Now, I've said keep an eye on the people who suddenly developed an interest in UFOs out of nowhere in the Senate and the Congress and how they were going to be used later. One of those people is Ruben Gallego, who is fighting off a battle for the Senate with Kari Lake, and they have him actually currently winning in the polls. And I've told the Lake people online and stuff, use the weirdness of his time over here at Harvard studying psychological operations and crowd control. Maybe that'll help you. And the fact that he has all this, we need to find out the truth about those UFOs. This crossover between the COG people and the congressional people, and then the UFO file is absolutely fascinating and feeds right directly into this idea that they want to use the UFO threat to cause emergency powers to come in. That is a kind of the ultimate use of the continuity of government program. Think about it. And it's the ultimate threat, is it not? So it's a heck of a lot easier to manage than, say, a nuclear threat. A lot less damage, too. So there's a lot more to go into in terms of that constitutional amendment. What I want to tell you about it is this. First, it should be rejected completely. So if you are in the process of being in touch with your congressman, make sure they signal out this continuity amendment and vote no, because the congressional continuity constitutional amendment that will supposedly be used to temporarily fill House vacancies means that they want to be able to replace the entire Congress at the drop of a hat with whoever the person is appointed to. So they want to be able to say to them, you got elected here, you got placed in here, you're accountable here to the voters. And in the case of an emergency, you can snap your fingers and say, I relinquish the whole thing and I send it off to this person, some Yahoo that we don't know anything about. And that person can be just some flunky in the COG arrangement. This is important because COG has done a lot of sneaky things behind the scenes. When they get that public, you got to watch out. And this is the nature of what they do. There's a lot of headlines on this, and I think we have to track the story deep. And the more I track into the story, the more UFO people I find, or sudden converts to this UFO defense thing. Oh, geez, there's a UFO threat out there. We got to stop those UFOs. Suggested 28th Amendment focuses on a terror attack. Lawmakers say it must be easier to quickly fill 100 or more House vacancies with replacements. Now, this is interesting. You really think about what COG would need to do. They don't have the constitutional authority to do what they want to do. They have a kind of a martial law thing they can kick in. They're trying to move through the congressional process. This story is all over the place about the amendment that Wenstrup and his buddy are putting together, and this thing needs to be stopped flat. The 28th Amendment, no amendment to the Constitution at all, and look deep into the backgrounds of the crisscross, and we'll get a better idea, the continuity of government people lining up with the UFO threat people. And I guarantee you, when all is said and done, you're going to find Elizondo, Mellon, that whole gang right in the middle of the whole thing. And, for those people who, first, when I pointed out that the CIA was largely in charge of the UFO threat operation and the whole false UAP disclosure operation, I think a lot of them felt like, well, if that were true, the UFO, researchers would have said it, right? And no, it's wrong because the UFO researchers, just fell over and didn't do anything and didn't call them out. This is the nature of the problem with that field. It's loaded with a lot of opportunists. But what's interesting is this. The next thing that came up was, oh, well, the CIA has changed now. They're better. This is an interesting story. Assange, when he came out recently, he was just talking about how the CIA tried to assassinate him. Okay. Assange is a private citizen. And he was releasing things. We had a case to extradite him. But does that give the CIA any ability to eliminate this guy and assassinate him? No, it doesn't. But here's an interesting thing. A story came out, according to Assange, the CIA was going after his son's DNA. That's the nature of the organization that people want to get UFO disclosure from. Quote, my wife and my infant son were also targeted. A CIA asset was permanently assigned to track my wife, and instructions were given to obtain DNA from my 6-month-old son. That's the nature of the sick bureaucracy that has ruled the roost. And so the idea of throwing, UFO disclosure, something that important to humanity, through, the sleazy Elizondo counter intel people, no, the CIA, look, the whole TTSA thing and all that, it's all CIA operation. That's all it is. And originally what I did was very simple. From TTSA's own site, which they've taken down, I still have a copy of it. All of the different people all had at least decades-long relationships and work histories with the CIA. And Jim Semivan, who I pointed this out before, he was the COO, chief operating officer for the company. He's a 25-year-old. He's the top of the CIA directorate, a 25-year veteran, the top man. So, and he claimed to be a contactee to boot. Look, those are all CIA people. That whole thing has nothing to do with the real UFO file. That's the whole joke up front, and they want to be able to create a threat. They want to make money doing it, and they want to control that narrative, especially as they want to bring things out. We've talked about that whole breaking back in. They want to be able to reintroduce that high level of technology they've developed in the background on our dime under their secrecy. So you got to get real about that. And this whole phony thing about whistleblower Lou and all that stuff is nonsense. It's all CIA operation. And in fact, I think the intelligence agencies will respect the public more for calling it out and getting rid of it. And on a few different occasions, they have, they've bagged out on Lou, and they've bagged out on a lot of different CIA ops because their tendency to do it, if it's too much trouble, we'll just move into something else, But they see they have an opportunity. What they're trying to do with Elizondo here is very interesting because he failed on 2 different occasions to bring off the op, as it were. So this new version is to have him come in through a publisher of a book and then have them book all these media engagements. So he's avoiding any scrutiny on the lower level of, researchers or podcasts and things like that. He just comes in on this kind of media orchestrated by the intelligence community. So that's what that is. That has nothing to do with people's interaction with UFOs. And we've shown how the UFO file is real on this program, and those experiences that people have are real. Some of them have been engineered, no question, but the majority of those experiences are literal, and there's a long history of it that goes back, and we'll find intergenerationally, it goes back to your parents, your grandparents. Someone back there has encountered this phenomena. So that's the nature of the real thing. The thing that they're pushing up front is dangerous because, they're adopting the whole UFO thing as a threat. And that's where the emergency powers piece comes in. When you find Ohio congressmen suddenly discovering the UFO file and then calling for continuity of Congress where they can snap their fingers and get rid of, just replace everyone that we've sent there, that's very dangerous. And so those constitutional amendments, Constitutional Amendment 28, sponsored by those two, and I'll say it again. I'll get their names on this, but as I find them, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
He's a Death Star community says, great dot connecting, DJ. A clear implication that UFO could be used to institute COG, just like the report from Iron Mountain back in the 60s stated.
That's a fantastic point. Iron Mountain book looks a whole lot more real as we flash forward now. And there's very deep information in there. And for me, it took a committee of really, some of the best intellects of the period to put together that report. And it's interesting because at times it's been attributed to John Kenneth Galbraith. And, that's somebody who had the wide-ranging enough intellect to be able to pull in all those different things and to size up society based on labor, race, war, and all the rest of it. So you needed some very deep thinkers to pull that off. We have a couple of advantages that came out of that period. Another one's the Torbett document. And the Torbett document gives you the Defense Industrial Security Command. That's where the heart of the UFO file was, and the people involved. The level of information in the Torbett document is just stunning. But what it gives you is, for example, the connection of somebody like Roy Cohn to aerospace, the Vatican, and the mafia. Those things, if you really want to talk deep state, that's where you're going. And so when you get into somebody like Cohn, but then you bring that around and you realize Cohn is Trump's political mentor and helps him put up things like Trump Tower and lets him know where the bodies are buried in the deep state, then we understand the level of resistance to President Trump, including 2 assassination attempts. Think about that. Absolutely incredible. But for the record, it's Derek Kilmer. It's his proposed amendment to the Constitution. And Brad Wenstrup with the big UFO connection there. William Timmons and Emmanuel Cleaver are also involved. And Timmons has an interesting background. I wanted to say this about Kilmer is he was on the Space Committee in the Senate. So we, space and UFOs immediately with these COG amendment. But we're going to be watching that. So if you didn't catch everything that I was putting across there, don't worry about it. I sent several special reports on our friend Kilmer and his very unusual constitutional amendment, the 28th Amendment. One quick follow-up on all that, and it has to do with our friend
while you're looking that
Kilmer.
up,
Yes.
Ultra Heat Seeker says, didn't Werner von Braun's assistant say that he mentioned asteroids and then aliens as manufactured threats to continue funding NASA, but now would fall to the private sector?
Well, I'm glad you brought up NASA there. Look, we know von Braun, this is a very interesting piece there, and we've understood it's a weird thing that it's out there, but it's basically a series of predictions that he gave to his assistant, Carol Rosen. And she was, she came out and she worked with him, the aerospace company that he was in before he died. And he said there's a lot of very interesting stories between them, including the fact that when he was ill, he made her give a speech. And she said, I can't do a speech for you. I don't even know how to do this. He said, don't worry about it. Just go up there. I will be there with you. So she stands up at the podium there and she doesn't know what she's going to say. And suddenly he shows up in her ear. 1976. Think about that. How does that work? If you want to know, does Kamala Harris have wireless earrings that can receive messages and all that? Yeah, they've been doing this for a long, long time. That's nothing. But he was able to put it across that they were going to use a series of different threats, and that their final 2 threats would be asteroids and finally an ET invasion. And he said, quote, it would all be false. So these are different things that they have set up. Just like, we heard that they had a plan before 9/11 to take over a half dozen countries in the Middle East. So they already had the plans there. They just grab them off the shelf, the minute they get the emergency that they need. The deep event, and I'm going to read a quote of the deep event. A couple of last bits here about Derek Kilmer. Here's a shot of our friend Derek. Look at this guy. Derek is out there in Washington State shilling for COG. And quote, he says, I introduced a constitutional amendment to require newly elected representatives to provide a list of at least 5 designees qualified to serve in their place should they pass away during their term. Under our proposal, if a representative passes away, the governor must select a replacement from the list within 10 days, and the Speaker of the House is to immediately fill the vacancy with the chosen individual. The designee would serve as a representative only temporarily. Yeah, so this is introducing continuity of government into the constitutional process of replacing a congressman. This is interesting too. What do you got?
Scarlet Fire says, sorry, where's his pencil pocket protector?
It is, yeah, this is a character.
He's a dangerous nerd.
But yeah, they'll use them. They will use them. There's no question about it. There was a weird thing that came up in the midst of all this, and it'll be my last piece on COG before we do the quotes and then take your questions. But it was this one, and this is quite fascinating. It is the former leader of COG, Northcom Commander Van Herk of the 509th Bombing Group, which after all was the original group that found the Roswell wreckage. Well, he found it years later. And he wasn't around for Roswell, but he came out of the same bombing group. That's quite a fingerprint. Former NORAD chief questions Canada's urgency on Arctic defense. Trudeau has promised to buy fighter jets and subs, but there's not a history of Canada taking those actions, says retired U.S. General Van Herk. Fractures in that deep system. Somebody feels like they're being subverted. Hey, we know how to run this operation. What are you doing? You're using Canadian emergency powers to go around us? So I found that interesting. It's rare to see the deep operators going after each other or questioning each other. That's new. Let's see if more of that comes up as we go. But in isolation, it was pretty interesting. The other thing about Van Herk, of course, is he was the guy who was there during the whole Chinese balloon thing, saying we're shooting down UFOs. They use the phrase repeatedly. And as the NORAD commander, it's to place in the public's idea that we can have something in our airspace as a UFO and then attack it, and NORAD is at the helm. They didn't send Stepford Biden out there to do this and say we're shooting down the Chinese balloon. They sent Van Herk solo. That's his role. He's the COG NORAD commander. So that represented a change. Go back and look in history and look for anything like that Northcom guy coming out and just taking over like that. This is a trial balloon, literally, going on there. This is the joint resolution, and it is the 28th Amendment, proposing an amendment to the Constitution of the U.S. to temporarily fill vacancies in the House of Representatives for the continuity of government of Congress. Now, it's a quick read, and I highly recommend that you do it. But basically, underneath all the flowery language on top and just saying, hey, we might as well have people to do this. Look, we've had the United States Congress for over 200 years. The idea that suddenly they just figured out, we need a process here for how we designate who replaces who. That's pure COG subverting and taking over and saying, here's how you replace the entire House of Congress. That's extremely dangerous. And that the people involved have that UFO connection, to me, says a whole lot based on the kind of research we have here. Now, let's get a couple of things and connect up that deep state UFO world, and then we'll take your questions. How does that sound? Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is the special report, COG UFO SSP Deep Events. I want to mention to you, especially if you're new here, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. That's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch and gets us around the incredible secrecy that we experience on a regular basis in dark journalist world. What it lets you know is the incredible interviews, X-series episodes that will blow your mind, documentaries. We have the best documentaries coming up, a docuseries on Kennedy and Lloyd Berkner and the activities of Lloyd Berkner with John F. Kennedy behind the scenes, and also the continuation of our Hot Zone Atlantis documentary series. Stand Up and Be Counted, letting you know the incredible things we have coming up, including interviews, documentaries, and events coming up. All for you and all there. And of course, incredible guests like Dr. Farrell, Gigi Young. When she gets through all this, we'll have Gigi back on the show to tell us. And I want to mention this again, which is remember to get behind the work of Gigi, especially going through all this stuff. I can say this, Gigi, as a friend, she's not a self-promoter at all. So, if you appreciate the work that she does, and as she's going through all this, get there to gigiyoung.com. And I think that she has some shows coming up. So make sure you stand up and be counted and make sure you're there. Okay, let's do this. Wonderful book by Scott and Suzanne Ramsey, who I've had some communication with, just incredible people. And they did a wonderful set of books that helped us understand the Aztec case and how real it was, which was a crash in Aztec, New Mexico in 1948, year after the Roswell incident, and an incredible case. They talk all about the work of Bill Steinman, who did UFO Crash. That book is very interesting, is right here. And UFO Crash, it has all the information about Robert Sarbarker, which I consider crucial to understanding anything about UFOs. Sarbarker was best friends with and lifelong colleagues with Thomas Townsend Brown. They were the ones who went away to the western tip of Cuba every year for a month. And we know that's where the secret city off the coast there, which has the Atlantean ruins, right in the heart of the hot zone. So those stories connect up the UFO file and the hot zone quite nicely. But here's what they have to say about Steinman and his discovery of Sarbarker. Sarbarker, I want to say this, he was one of the top physicists. He was like the Oppenheimer, and they had him on the cover of Time, Saturday Evening Post, all the stuff that they did. And this guy was taken out of the history books, doesn't even have a Wikipedia page because he talked to UFOs out of school and died shortly after. Definitely an ex-Share personnel. One of Steinman's most important contributions was locating U.S. scientist William Sarbarker to affirm the now famous revelations made by Canadian scientist Wilbert Smith. Smith, who was senior radio engineer for the Canadian Department of Transport to Ottawa, on November 21st, 1950, sent a confidential internal memo to his supervisor titled Geomagnetics. It was never intended to become public information. The document was uncovered by RCAF member and Canadian flying saucer researcher Arthur Bray. Steinman records that the document was originally top secret, but was downgraded to confidential with the stipulation it should never be released to the public. There's a good reason for that. Points made in the document were specific. Get ready. Here's the crossover. The matter of UFOs is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher even than the H-bomb. Flying saucers exist. We know that was the name in the day. It's still better than UAP. Their modus operandi is unknown, but concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush. That's the entire MJ-12 arc. Vannevar Bush, his protege was John Trump, Uncle John Trump. The entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance. That's all you need to know. Sarbarker in the 80s was rediscovered by Steinman, who looked him up and said, "What's going on here?" And he said, "Well, look, we did. We had crashed UFOs. Yeah, we checked them out. We tried to redevelop the stuff. We went through all kinds of bizarre analysis. I don't know why they never let it out." He said, "Yeah, we found bodies in there too. And the bodies, they were like insects." And he said, we figured they were designed or built by somebody to pick up the tremendous G-force and things that happen. And what else can we tell you? He said, he gave him the lineage of who controlled the UFO file, Vannevar Bush. And he went right down the line about the succession list. So he gave out a lot of information. And then he said, "I was in on some of the meetings, but look, Oppenheimer, he was right in the heart of it. Yeah, you bet that he was. Von Braun, von Braun was working on the UFO redevelopment as well. So you don't need MJ12 documents. You don't need secret this or that. Sarbarker went on the record with it himself twice over a 30-year period. And the second time around probably cost him his life. As a matter of fact, there was a UFO researcher, Wendell Stevens, who thought that it had cost him his life because it's a weird end to his story. And he lived here in Cambridge and in Florida. But, after he has this series of letters, conversations with Steinman and Stanton Friedman, he goes to his car one day and he gets his hand on the car handle and it's all jelly. And he says, "Oh, it's weird, So his son hears from him and he's calling him from the hospital. He said, "Yeah, I developed these chest pains." He said, "It's really weird too. All I can tell you is there was all this jelly on my door handle." And after that, I was driving and I started to feel sick. I drove to the hospital. So he died shortly after that. So they didn't want, his loose lips around. That's pure X-Protect operation. But Sarbarker was such an inside man, along with T.T. Brown. They were operating on the deepest level. And at the same time, they were under the influence of X-Protect, but they were X-Share people. And X-Protect had a hard time getting rid of them and keeping them under control. And also, there were times when, as T.T. Brown's daughter told me, as soon as he found out what they were doing with his deep research around UFOs, he would bail out and they would go after him. And then he would take the whole family to Eleuthera Island. And she'd say, I'd be a 12-year-old kid and we're surrounded by machine guns, security, to make sure that this group doesn't get their hands on my dad. So there are many stories to tell in the heart of all that. But what I think is important here is that we get it clear that Sarbarker put on the record the level of secrecy of the UFO file. It's the top secret in the U.S. government. So therefore, all the counter intel, tap dancing, and all the ops and, this level of secrecy, the discrediting of people, and even sometimes the lethal discrediting of people like Morris Jessup. This is very important for us to understand on that level. Now, let's connect it with the next definition, which is the definition of deep events coming directly from Professor Peter Dale Scott of Berkeley University, who's the premier deep state researcher, coined the term, in fact, and in my opinion, the premier JFK assassination researcher. It's a central proposition to this book that the road to U.S. hegemony must be understood as in part a consequence of a series of structural deep events. And this series began with the assassination in 1963 of a president who was moving to change U.S. policies with respect to Cuba, Vietnam, and above all, Soviet Union. By structural deep events, I mean events that are never fully understood and arise out of an ongoing covert processes, have political consequences that enlarge covert government, and are subsequently covered up by demonstrable omissions and falsifications in historical records. Here, the assassination in Dallas may be compared to later structural deep events, most notably Watergate and 9/11. I cannot say enough that I am not attributing all these deep events to any single agency or secret team, nor is the purpose of this book to identify the president's killers. But in chapter 2, I will show how alleged evidence about Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico was manipulated and altered by elements in the CIA. Now, deep events. We may be heading into a deep event. So, a deep event, again, is something that the deep state operates, and they will want they will step into the public arena for the deep state event and then retreat again, leaving all the debris. But they've caused a policy change. In 9/11, we got the Patriot Act. In the JFK assassination, you got the Vietnam War. And the UFO file, instead of being shared with the Soviet Union and a joint space program and all the things that Kennedy had outlined that we've revealed in our research, and in a very important special we're doing on the 61st anniversary on November 22nd, right here on this channel. The fact that Kennedy was assassinated over the UFO file can be understood in the context of that knowledge of what deep events are and the other knowledge of Sar Barker saying the UFO file was the top secret inside the government. When you put those two pieces together, and I'm glad the person earlier mentioned NASA, because NASA is kind of the intermediary between the deep state and the UFO file. They are a recipient of both sides, as much as being just the regular agency that deals with space. They're feeding intelligence back on one hand. And that space intelligence from above, remember, it's very interesting. If you go back and back and back, when we think about this influence of paperclip scientists on NASA and on our government and their kind of martial philosophy invading our government, we have to remember that the original plan in Nazi Germany, before they were defeated, their idea of a rocket program and a space program was simple. It was control things on the ground from above, from space. And, there was the hearkening to Valhalla and, the realm of the gods and Mars and all that. But its essential aspects were, if you want control, you control from above, looking down on everything. They were that advanced to know that this is where things were going. And although their front of the Nazi party got defeated, of course, they reinvested and re-emerged in different ways. But they invested themselves in our NASA program. And so that is an aspect and a core aspect involved here. The aerospace aspect in the JFK assassination is the thing that we've brought forward. And, there are a few researchers who get to that point. And one of those people was Jim Garrison, whose final conclusion was pretty simple. He said, this was actually done by the aerospace wing of the military industrial complex. And they did it through the intelligence corridor between the aerospace companies and the intelligence complex. That's crucial because this is the only guy who actually ever pressed a case in JFK's murder. So that's where he got to. Later, there are a lot of obfuscations in all of this. Mafia and all this kind of thing. And of course, the ridiculous story of the lone nut and all the rest of it. But it forms a core of a reality problem. And the reality problem is the people on the ground don't believe that official story, which is a foundation, bedrock story of American history. And at the same time, they've been flooded with different versions, so they don't know exactly which version is true. The aerospace one is often left out because that's where you find the core of the piece. A quote now from Garrison, and then we'll move to your questions. This is from that Assassination of America book, and I will say it on the record, the rarest book, the most difficult book to find in all of my travels ever. And I was able to find the entire set. It took a long time. But Here's what Garrison had to say while he was in the middle of his case, understanding who he was up against. And remember, Garrison kept running into strange UFO aerospace aspects in his case. He's like, where's this coming from? Question. Do you have any doubt that Robert Kennedy would have opened the whole case up again once in the White House? Garrison. I don't think there's any question at all. I think the fact that he was killed so quickly indicate that there's no question in the mind of the cabal element of the CIA. I think in his case, they had no other alternative. I'm sure they were reluctant to go through another assassination, but they were not taking the chance of him becoming president. Question, do your investigations still point to any right-wing elements? This is Garrison. It isn't really right-wing. Technically, it's a fascist structure in that it's diametrically opposed to communism, but in a way that's almost a centrist sort of thing. It is a power which has developed within the government like a thunderhead. The role of the Central Intelligence Agency has become so clear that where you see these organizations used, such as the National States Party, the one they use the most, it's an organization which they've penetrated at an earlier date. The one talent the CIA has developed more than any other intelligence agency on Earth is deception and cover. Since survival is involved down to the last individual, they have cover. This guy's a priest in the old Orthodox Church. This guy is active in the National States Rights Party. It always gives them cover. So you never have anybody in the CIA, but when you actually end up with is the Central Intelligence Agency. Think about that with Thomas Crooks or Robert Ruth, and you find that you're still battling the same force that we're coming to grips with here. And with that, Miss Olivia, you have an interesting quote here to close the show with, and we'll take your last question.
Okay.
Miss Olivia, which is from American Deep State. Again, Peter Dale Scott's book, brilliant summation of 5 decades of deep research. Here's his conclusion. Quote, since the 1950s, American history has seen 2 competing narratives, one relatively stable and benign, and one posing a lawless and dangerous threat to constitutional democracy. On the one hand, a succession of power-hungry men have amassed excessive powers and then in consequences have self-destructed and been ousted. Joe McCarthy in the 50s, Richard Nixon in 74, Oliver North in 86, Donald Rumsfeld in 2006. The rise and fall might suggest that American politics essentially comprises a self-correcting homeostatic system, one in which excessive power generates counterforces to correct it, but the appearance of equilibrium is misleading. Each of these viable figures exercise power because of their connection to the subterranean accumulation of illegal, secret powers assembled originally and principally by J. Edgar Hoover. Remember, Hoover was around since the 1920s. The departure of individuals did not establish effective legal checks and balances in the deep powers behind them. The one serious congressional effort to do this after Nixon's resignation in 1974 was successfully stymied largely by 2 men, Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, who went on to plan successfully for the expansion and implementation of these same COG powers. The second narrative illustrates the truth of the principle well understood by America's founding fathers that power unchecked will continue to grow like a cancer. The unchecked growth of the security state has been reinforced by a parallel related development, the unchecked accumulation of gross wealth by the top 1% of the 1%. The combined growth of great wealth in the security state has radically diminished the powers of the public state, and above all, Congress, to restore equilibrium to the American political system. This process, as many have warned, is not at all homeostatic, but threatens disaster if not brought under control, unquote. That's Professor Scott writing 10 years ago. Where are we now?